Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fortmaster, and welcome back to another game theory reaction, How to Survive an Urban Apocalypse, and it's about Tom Clancy's The Division Resurgence. I've never actually read any Tom Clancy books. The closest I've gotten, I guess you could say, would be Clive Cussler, but again, that's a completely different person, so again, that's not really that close. Anyway, from what I've heard, Tom Clancy's books kind of get weird near the end, of his life, But yeah, The Division was, of course, if everything else falls apart, then there's like this secret division of people that are just spread out throughout the civilian populace that are supposed to do something. I don't know. It was a very weird concept, resulting in, a couple of okay games, but now MatPat's going to be involved in it, so I'm kind of excited to see what he has to say. Original is linked in the description if you haven't seen it for some reason. Corner video will be leading to my newest film theory reaction, which at the moment I don't actually know what that is because it hasn't been released yet. You'll have to see by clicking on the link. So with that all out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
New York. The Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. But
City was so good they named it twice.
A nickname and more just factual information. The 5 boroughs. Named that way because New York can be divided up into 5 separate chunks, or boroughs, each with their own personality. From the artsy vibes of Brooklyn to the rich cultural history of the Bronx. And let me tell you, despite them all being part of the exact same city, the rivalry between them gets intense. For decades, people have argued about which one is the best. But now there's Tom Clancy's Division Resurgence, which has entered the chat and squashed the debate. With only one major safe settlement throughout all the 5 boroughs, this game sent a statement. In a survival situation, one and only one borough would be the one to come out on top. But is the game right? Is it wrong? As a former New Yorker myself, I wasn't going to take this answer lying down. And so today, I'm going to settle the debate once and for all. When caught in an end-of-the-world scenario, which borough in New York is going to be the best borough in New York? This right here, this is going to be some crucial life-saving information. And don't you forget about it.
Smack.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's always prepared for the end of the world. And that constant paranoia is going to come in handy because today's episode is sponsored by Ubisoft and their brand new mobile game, Division Resurgence.
Oh, it's a mobile game. That's why I haven't heard anything about it.
Probably should. It's the latest installment in the iconic Tom Clancy series, which, if you've never played, is fantastic. These games are set in New York City, and not just a version of New York City. This is a completely accurate recreation of the real world, with streets and landmarks exactly where you'd expect them to be. And then that's when you realize that Division Resurgence is a mobile game, which is just that much more impressive. It also means that I can now revisit my old memories of being a starving actor living in the Upper East Side whenever and wherever I want. Yippee. However, while it might be an accurate recreation, not everything is.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say this here. Again, the previous Division games, they weren't really my thing, and this one, being mobile is definitely not my thing because I don't have fun playing games on this thing, okay? So I don't know about you guys, but if I have the option between playing something like this or playing something like this, I'm gonna choose the big screen in the comfy chair rather than, on my phone.
Right in the Division's New York. An eco-terrorist has created an incredibly potent virus known as the green poison, which spreads through banknotes. As money switches hands, the viral infection grows. Fortunately, not all hope is lost. To stop the spread, the government shuts down the city. Nothing coming in, and more importantly, nothing coming out. Resurgence mostly takes place a few weeks after the start of the outbreak, when the good of humanity is still prevailing. While some people naturally turn to crime and violence, one group bands together to form the Spring Blossom Settlement, located in Manhattan down near Chinatown. Here, you can rest, gather supplies, and take on missions to help your fellow citizens as a one-man operation. But as someone who spent a good chunk of his early adult life living in New York, I felt old borough rivalries beginning to rise up. While this in-game settlement feels like a utopia inside of a city of chaos, of all the boroughs, did they really make the best call to plop it right here, smack dab in the middle of Manhattan? Sure, it's the place that everyone knows, but in a survival situation, I don't think that's going to be a big point in its favor. Plus, there are just lots of hidden gems around the city of New York, which I'm sure most New York locals down in the comments are gonna tell you. I really like the cookies from Levain Bakery, the soup dumplings from Joe's Shanghai, and the Broadway show Grey House. But it's a valid question. If New York suddenly shut down, isolating itself from the rest of the world, which borough would be the best borough for setting up your own personal safety bunker? You know how the song goes? They say that you won't last too long on Broadway. But, you know,
I don't think they meant that
a
way.
bit more sustainable. And now it's time to figure out where that is. In case you skipped out on 3rd grade geography, New York is split up into 5 boroughs. Manhattan, this sliver right here that most tourists think is just the entirety of New York. The Bronx up in the north, known as the birthplace of hip-hop and home to the Yankees baseball team. Brooklyn, famous for its hipsters and not having a 9-9 precinct. Queens to the east, the largest of the boroughs. And Staten Island to the south, which is an island and has a ferry, I guess. Honestly, I never spent all that much time in Staten Island. Nevertheless, which of these is going to be our best home for survival? Let's find out. In the first side...
Okay, just before he talks about anything else, I'm going to say off the top of my head, probably Staten Island, because A, it's an island, so if you can clear out the island, you have a natural layer of defense being, you know, water around you, if you can at least, you know, monitor it and keep stuff, you know, safe.
Mission of the game, we're asked to help members of the Spring Blossom settlements retrieve their missing supplies. And while the types of supplies can vary from mission to mission, I think we can all agree on which one is going to be priority number 1 when it comes to IRL action.
Food.
Fortunately, when it comes to food supplies, we have ourselves a couple different options. One obvious choice would be to raid local grocery stores and restaurants. Since 2017, the City of New York Mayor's Office issues a report on nightlife within the city, listing 25,800 total nightlife establishments, 19,400 of which are restaurants. Of the 5 boroughs, Manhattan leads the way by far, with 8,574 restaurants, which is almost twice Brooklyn's 4,400 and more than 10 times Staten Island's 750. That means that right after things go south, like we see it in the game, Manhattan is going to be teeming with food, which is good, but that food isn't going to last forever, which is bad. Eventually, that food's going to spoil, and then what? The gray streets and tall buildings of Manhattan aren't exactly bursting with huntable wildlife, unless you're really into pigeon meat, I suppose. Gathering really isn't going to be a strong option here either. Sure, you might be able to find a few berry bushes or a privately owned apple tree here or there, but there simply isn't enough wild flora to help support the estimated 4 billion pounds of fruits and veggies that New Yorkers are consuming in an average year. Nope.
I mean, granted, you say that, Matt, but you also have to take into consideration that a lot of people have died, so I'm going to guess that numbers be cut down a bit.
Like humans for thousands of years since the Neolithic Revolution, you're going to need to farm. Funny thing about farming, though, you kind of need dirt to grow anything, and New York City ain't exactly known for its verdant forests. That said, one of the characters that we meet in Division Resurgence gives us a clue on how they plan to solve the problem. Kevin Zhang informs us of their rooftop stockpiling greenhouses that have been set up to grow their own food.
What do you do for food?
This bridge leads to our rooftop stockpile, and then we got the greenhouses set up beyond that.
Setting one of these up from scratch can be a lot of effort. However, there is a New York bill currently circulating that aims to turn all public school rooftops into gardens. So for survival purposes, your best bet is going to be finding a borough with the most public schools so you can claim all that land for yourself. Staten Island comes in at the low end with 84 public schools. The Bronx and Queens, meanwhile, are very close to each other with 365 and 382 respectively. Brooklyn has a respectable 575 public schools, but in general, nothing comes close to Manhattan again with a massive 879 public schools. But having the most available rooftop land is only the start of a sustainable solution here. There's still one key problem that we have to account for when it comes to food, and that's size. It takes a whole lot of land to keep a single person fed for the entirety of a year. Although estimates on this can vary greatly, the general consensus is that it takes somewhere around half an acre of land to grow enough crops to sustain a single person for a single year. That's the size of 4.5 NBA basketball courts. So, in addition
is that based on just flat out, like, if you had to do it yourself, or is this using modern technology? Because I know modern technology kind of, you know, alters things and multiplies and divides. You know, that's a lot of stuff.
All those school roofs, we might need to find some additional land. Where else do we have available to farm these crops? Well, I'm sure that the first thing that jumped to most of your minds is Central Park, a huge park that's smack dab in the middle of Manhattan. And while Central Park is certainly larger in area than 2 whole countries, Vatican City and Monaco, it is not the largest park in New York. Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx is New York's largest park, at 3 times the size of Central Park. Greenbelt in Staten Island, Van Cortlandt in the Bronx, and Flushing Meadows in Queens are are also all larger than Central Park. The point here being that if you want to convert parks to farms, there are other and better answers than just the obvious. Staten Island, for instance, actually comes out on top with 7,339 acres of park space, including that massive Greenbelt Park, but this one also has itself a problem. You see, a large part of Staten Island's parkland is built on top of a massive garbage pile. After the people of New York decided that they no longer wanted to look at massive trash towers, they decided to do the most responsible thing and just bury it all in dirt. Yeah, really, that is what they actually did. They buried the
I can see where the problem would be.
Soil, then got environmental engineers in to plant grasses and trees to reinforce the soil. Right now, it's actually doing pretty darn well, but if you attempted to farm all of that land, you would quickly plow out the new soil and root systems, and would just be left with a trash layer in no time. But then what about the Bronx? I've seen plenty of articles recently claiming that the Bronx is the greenest borough in NYC, with 24% of the total land designated as parkland. Queens is also representing itself well, with 7,180 acres of land dedicated to parks. But
how much of it is trash,
we also probably got to talk about which borough is going to help you defend yourself the most effectively.
Yeah, that's again very important.
Violence in any sort of way here. If you look at what happens in the world of Division Resurgence, I think it's pretty darn clear that firearms are going to be a necessity in defending yourself and your rooftop farmland. Of the 5 boroughs, it's Staten Island that actually has the highest gun ownership rate, more than doubling the rate of Queens, the next most strapped borough.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess I was partially right on that. I guess just not for the same reason.
But that's just talking about gun ownership rates, not percentage of total guns owned. And if you take that into account, suddenly these two boroughs swap position. In fact, Staten Island drops way down on the leaderboard with only 15% of all legally owned firearms in New York, while Queens has closer to 24%. Now, that may or may not be a good thing, because, well, it now means that we know where those firearms are owned. They're exactly that. They are owned. They can be used against you. If you're looking for excess ammunition to use for yourself, well, that's another story. In the game, multiple boroughs are completely empty because all government-run facilities have fallen into chaos. In other words, there's no police force. And no police force means a lot of unused weapon repositories just hanging around, all fair game for us to go in and scoop up some resources. So, which borough has itself the most police precincts? I'm
gonna say Manhattan.
In total, there are 77 across New York. Staten Island comes in with only 4, 12 in the Bronx, 16 in Queens, 22 in Manhattan, and finally Brooklyn with 23 total. It's kind of weird. Despite there only being 77 precincts, the number actually goes up to the 123rd precinct. Meanwhile, Brooklyn stops just shy of that 99 greatness, with its last one being the 94th. But perhaps the biggest and most important point to mention in any situation like this is population. Supply versus demand. During a citywide lockdown, as I'm sure we can all attest to, the demand for bare essentials skyrockets. And New York is the most populated city in the US. The more people there are, the thinner the resources are going to be stretched, and the more you're going to have to fight for your own survival. New York currently has a population of over 8.4 million people. And of the 5 boroughs, one always stands out as being a little bit different than the others. Staten Island. Staten Island is far less densely populated than the other 4 boroughs. Currently, there are around 475,000 people spread over its 60.9 square mile area, which is dwarfed by literally every other borough. The Bronx and Manhattan are over 3 times the size, at 1.5 million and 1.7 million people respectively. Queens is charging in with a massive 2.4 million people, but above them all is Brooklyn with a massive 2.7 million people. That said, sorry Brooklyn, this contest is more like golf. You want the lower, because at the end of the day, this is all about population density, and we want it to be as low as possible. Fewer people means fewer competition for resources and fewer hands that are gonna get me infected. Staten Island unsurprisingly holds the win in this category, with 8,618 people per square mile. That seems like a lot when you compare it to the rest of the US, which averages a mere 94 people per square mile. Vast difference there, but remember, we're talking about New York here. It's only getting worse from this point. Queens is relatively huge compared to all the other boroughs. It has itself 109 square miles of land, giving it second place with 22,000 people per square mile. The Bronx has a reasonable, if you can call any of these numbers reasonable, 35,000 people in each of its 42 square miles. And this is where Brooklyn ultimately loses out on its most populated title. Because while yes, it has 2.6 million people, it's spread out over a relatively large area of 71 square miles. Certainly less spacious than Queens, but a lot more than both the Bronx and Manhattan combined. In total, Brooklyn clocks in at 38,600 people per square mile. And speaking of that Manhattan number, with only 22.8 square miles to its name, that 1.6 million people suddenly looks a lot bigger, nearly doubling Brooklyn's population density with 75,000 people per square mile.
That's a lot of mouths to feed.
That is a lot of humanity in not a lot of space, and with very limited resources. If that's not a recipe for disaster during the post-apocalypse, I don't know what is. And so by totaling up the scores, it becomes very clear that, honestly, none of these options are completely ideal. While places like Staten Island might have themselves more green space than other boroughs and a smaller population, which means less fighting for resources, the land isn't exactly fertile. And worse, you would have nothing to defend yourself with. Manhattan will be an okay place in the short term. There's plenty of food and a decent supply of weaponry. That said, you're also struggling against massive overpopulation, as well as not enough land to sustain everyone's food needs. In the end, you'll want to end up in one of the boroughs with more green space, but hopefully one that can defend itself. The winner of this race isn't going to be the best in all categories, but a borough that's pretty strong.
Best with the most categories, yeah.
And that winner is, drumroll please, Queens. With its small population density, high amounts of parkland, and decent supply of police armories and food, this is the one that's going to give you a fighting chance of staying alive. And while it's solid in all the other categories, there's one final qualifier that sets Queens completely apart from the rest of the pack: water. If we're going to survive, we're going to need a constant supply of fresh, clean water.
Yeah, that's kind of important.
Tricky because all of New York's water supply is controlled by two main suppliers: the CATSKILL Delaware water supply system and the Croton water supply system. Both of these systems are located outside of the 5 boroughs. Well, you could siphon a pipe if someone tampers with or pollutes your supply further up the system. That's going to have some massive repercussions. We even see this in the 5th mission of the game, where the faction known as the Cleaners have taken over a water distribution facility, which begins polluting the supply to those downstream. If we're going to survive, we're going to need our own supply, something that all the other boroughs aren't going to be able to mess with. And the only borough that has that capability, Queens. The groundwater supply in southeastern Queens used to provide a small portion of the borough with fresh water until 2007. Now, it hasn't operated since then, but the infrastructure is there. And if you can get that supply switched on again, you are in the money. You have yourself water to drink, you can sell it to other survivors for supplies, you have water for your crops too. And at the very least, it certainly beats taking a swig out of the Hudson River. So there you have it, Queens, definitively the best New York borough within a very specific set of hypothetical parameters. But hey, thanks once again to Ubisoft for...
I mean, planning for like post-apocalyptic things and stuff like that, I mean, you can very easily look at them in one of two directions. One, you can say, oh, you're just being prepared, or two, you can look at it and say, oh, you're preparing for the worst. You need to try to, make things better instead of, preparing for when they go bad. And I mean, I flip-flop on which stance I take, but realistically, I'm going to be one of the people that dies in the initial wave of the apocalypse, and it wouldn't be my problem anymore. But yeah, I had no idea there was a new Division game coming out, but again, mobile game, so I don't think I'm going to be playing it. But yeah, again, original is linked in the description. If you haven't seen it for some reason, corner video will be leading to my film theory reaction. And I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.